Hello, everyone, and welcome to Whiskey Uncorked. My name is Brian, and we are back with another Scotch whiskey review this week. Coming back down to earth a little bit after some high H statement, high ABV, independent bottlings, basically, of just some really good whiskeys in the Macallan 19, the Macallan 21 and a Mortlock 19. We're back in the official bottling, kind of available, somewhat everyday kind of range. We're going to be talking about the Laphroaig 10 Sherry Cask Finish. So we are doing a bit of a Last Drops review today. Last Drops reviews, if you are new to the channel in the last few months, it's when I take a bottle that is basically completely done. There's one more pour left in this. Sometimes they're heavy last pours. It's a little hard to tell sometimes. But we take a bottle that is basically gone, ready to get finished off, and I just pour it in my glass and do kind of an off the top of my head review that really relies more so on my entire experience with that bottle rather than maybe the first 3-4 drams out of it. So I really wasn't actually going to review this bottle. I've had it for a couple of years. I bought this back in 2021 when this whiskey first came out, or at least when it first hit in the States, and picked one up immediately because we're talking, a sherry-influenced Laphroaig, 10 years old, 48% ABV, and it just sounded like, hey, this is going to be fantastic. So I grabbed one basically as soon as I could, paid quite a bit for it because I was in Colorado at the time. And for whatever reason, Colorado always seemed to have a bit of a premium on peated whiskeys. Seems like some of the rest of the country's catching up, but this was $90 back then. I can replace this bottle for $76 plus tax today from my local Total Wine. So definitely paid quite a bit for this back probably more than 3 years ago now. But I was excited to grab one, and definitely wouldn't pay $90 for this. We'll talk about value in terms of the $76 price point later. But I wasn't gonna review this because it's a few years old, and I've wanted to kind of lean more towards getting a more contemporary bottle to make the review just maybe a little bit more relevant. But I've reviewed a few other whiskeys that are in the same category, that heavily peated, heavily sherried category, and it just made sense. I felt like this is official bottling. I don't know when I'm going to pick up one of these, and you'll learn more about that later when I do the tasting notes and give this thing a score, because, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this based on what my brain tells me it should be. So with that, let's jump right into the review. I don't believe this bottle is chill filtered. It does not say on the bottle. I think it came with a tube. I threw that out years ago. So, but I don't think it is based on. It's 48% ABV, so they don't have to per se. Although I don't like when people say they don't have to. They never have to. But it is almost certainly not colored. It is pretty dark. It has a pretty solid look of sherry influence to it. And 48% sherry, peat, Laphroaig, Isla, just the whole thing. This bottle should, in theory, be fantastic. But let me say this. Yeah, this hasn't really lived up to my hopes for it. I will say this. I did have this whiskey, not the specific bottle, in a blind tasting once, and it won that blind, and I still remember that because it was fantastic. It was everything I wanted it to be. I just have never had that experience with this one. That bottle was bought around the same time as this one. That blind was probably year and a half ago now, but I was surprised because I never really had that experience with this bottle, and I still have not repeated it with this one. So yeah, it kind of is what it is. I don't know if it's batch variation there. I don't know if the air got into this one or something. I don't know. Who knows? But it's not bad. This is good. But let's get into the nosing and tasting notes. See how it's doing today. This is my last pour of this, at least outside of my sample that I keep. So yeah, let's check it out on the nose. Here we go. So the one thing that I've never had a problem with this whiskey was picking up the Laphroaig character. this on both the nose and the palate. Lots of Laphroaig, iodine, band-aids, peppery peat, right? Just the whole Laphroaig signature is there. It hits you immediately. And it's almost to the point where, with that sherry influence, you almost wonder, like, maybe you're starting to get worried a little bit. Because it's so Laphroaig-y, sometimes you do expect, like, a real good sherry influence to kind of round that off a little bit. Start to integrate and start to mix up those more decadent, rich flavors. And this is just very Laphroaig. The sherry nose on this is not super present. You can tell it's sherried, but right off the bat, you're starting to realize that the color on this whiskey is not necessarily indicative of the degree of sherry influence in the actual glass. All right, let's see if we can get anything else today. Like I said, the Laphroaig nose is so dominant on this that I'm not really able to pick out a ton of complexity, but let's see what else is there. So again, there's some vanilla, there's like some just Scotch whiskey notes. It's almost like this is, maybe it is colored, I don't know, because I'm looking for the sherry notes, and really the most I'm finding is maybe just a spritz of fruit, and it's dirty, and it's quintessential Laphroaig, but I'm more finding like bourbon barrel notes. I'm finding some vanilla, there's like a touch of malt, and just a little bit of oak and fruit, which obviously that oak isn't necessarily going to be coming from the sherry cask, although if these were European sherry casks, which I kind of think they may have been, which seems a little strange because with something like this, this seems like what you would use an American sherry cask for, just because this is going to be core range, it's going to be always available, so I don't know if you would use like really good European oak sherry casks for something like this, but there's maybe just a little bit of herbal spice, but it's really the Laphroaig smoke, some oakiness, some vanilla, a little bit of fruit, yeah, a little bit of the herbal spice, and that's a black pepper as well, and just that's kind of it. It's not that the nose smells bad or that it's super quiet or anything like that. It's just, again, when I bought this bottle and I first started nosing it, I'm like, oh, this isn't what I expected. But let's try it on the palate and see what we're tasting. Cheers. So at the 48%, I do believe it's non-chill filtered because it has a really nice mouthfeel. There's definitely an oiliness to the overall palate. This is tasting pretty good tonight. It's on the finish, which is where my criticisms were going to be, given that I've drank this entire bottle now. It did bloom out a little bit better than it has maybe in the recent months, or really the entire bottle, where I was getting a little bit of chocolate, a little bit of tobacco, black pepper, the Isla Laphroaig smoke, a little ashy, touch of coffee. But compared to some of the other whiskeys that I think we've even reviewed on this channel, that this is probably competing with, the Kilchoman Snag probably being its primary kind of everyday competitor these days. The experience on that is just, at least for me, what I'm looking for. But so that sip was pretty good though. I would say I had a little sip of like Laphroaig 10 to get my palate warmed up before I turned the camera on. But that was probably one of the tastier pours I've had of this, at least recently. But let's go in for a second sip and see what else we can pull out of here. Here we go. More vanilla up front with a little bit of honey. The sweetness is more on the front of the palate, which is usually the case anyways. Laphroaig peat, again, very pretty much the star of the show, right? The Laphroaig character, which you expect at 48%, 10 years old, so it's hasn't lost too much of its PD character from aging. Yeah, didn't get quite the finish on the second sip. First sip finish was a little bit better when the palate was still basically pretty fresh, still very oily. I can feel it, it's kind of coating the back of my lips. It was getting more black pepper. It didn't pick up any of the herbal on the palate at all, and that's not something I have picked up on this from my memory. The finish was a little weak there, which has generally been my experience with this one, where it has a nice finish. It definitely coats your mouth. You can continue to taste it, but it never quite evolves. Had a little bit better success with that on the first sip, but man, it evened out quite a bit on the second. So I'm gonna do one more, see if it changed at all, see if we get anything else, and then we'll talk about a score, talk about value, and hopefully keep this one a little bit short today, which is the last drop bottle reviews usually are. But here we go. Cheers. Yeah, it's so creamy on the front. It's almost like a custard, or it's a slight tang, like a citric or a lactic tang, but not like Bruichladdich lactic, but like a custard or yogurt or something, even in the texture. But vanilla, honey, fruit, I think that's where it really lacks. There's not a lot, right? There's a little bit of like dark cherry, really dark fruits, maybe more like stewed fruits, I guess, a little bit, but it's light. It's sweet overall, although not sweet like the Macallan was last week or anything like that. Sweet for an Islay whiskey, I suppose. But yeah, I just don't get that sherry punch. That's the reason I bought this bottle, the reason I got excited about it. It's a good whiskey. It tastes good, but it's just lacking a little something. This almost feels like, so the standard Laphroaig 10 is 40% in the UK. Here, I believe it's 43%. I just bought a bottle. I got a great deal on a bottle of the standard 10, so we'll be reviewing that at some point here in the next few months. But that's 43%. Then you have the quarter cask, which I think it's been a long time since I've had a bottle of the quarter cask as well, but that one was really good. I definitely felt like that was the better experience between the standard 10. And of course you have the cask strength at 10. This feels like it's trying to fit in the middle of something. It's not fully committing. Again, with the color and the specs and everything, it just felt like this should have been more. And we just reviewed the Laphroaig Cartchus 2024 edition, which that's PX. It doesn't explicitly state whether this is Oloroso or PX. You assume Oloroso, but the sherry flavor is not strong enough to really even be able to tell. It's really just adding a subtlety and giving the color. Man, maybe there is some artificial color in here. I don't know. I couldn't find a definitive answer online. If you know, let me know in the comments if it is indeed colored or if it's natural. But hopefully maybe I can find an answer before I do the little info card. So check that for my one last check to see if I can find whether somebody knows or not, because this doesn't feel like it has the influence that it looks like. So anyway, I'm rambling a little bit. It's supposed to be short. I'm gonna give this a 6 out of 10. It's a good whiskey. The ABV definitely helps it. The extra ABV helps it over the standard 10. It is different from the quarter cask from what I remember. Obviously that there is sherry influence here. You are able to get it. It seems like maybe like the bulk of that is more on that first sip, and then, like I said, at least for me, it's always evened out really quickly. So I'll give it a 6 out of 10, which is above average. I still think I'm gonna pick up a bottle of like a Laphroaig 10, which, like I said, I had a little sip of right before this just to get my palate warmed up. And yeah, I just remember like, oh yeah, the Laphroaig 10 is pretty good, and it just has more complete experience. Not heavily sherried, but it just, there's less disappointment. It tastes like what it tastes like what I expect it to taste like. So not saying, so this is a disappointment on one hand, but it is still a pretty good whiskey. And as I mentioned, I did have a really great experience with this in a blind tasting, but I have never been able to reproduce that experience outside of that blind tasting. And what are you gonna do? Value wise, again, I paid like 90 bucks for this back in 2021, which we're gonna throw that out. It's $76 plus tax here at the local Total Wine, which I took a look, and the Kilchoman Snag is priced at the exact same thing, 46%, so slightly lower. Obviously no age statement, but in this regard, I think that almost helps it. You have a few other whiskeys that kind of live in this category, kind of. There's not a lot of just heavily peated sherry core range bottles at 46 or 48%. Not a ton of them, because like even if you look at like the Ugadal and things, that's higher ABV. We looked at the Leg Corey Cravey, that was 55%. But yeah, we're pretty limited with this style of whiskey. From a core range, readily available and reasonably priced, because even those Ardbeg Ugadals, those aren't cheap bottles anymore these days. So value-wise, it's not bad in terms of what it is versus its competitors. That kind of mid-$70 for heavily peated cask influence. It's probably about what you would expect to pay. But I think just that Kilchoman Snag, if you're going to pick between one of those two, there's a pretty clear winner there. So overall, it's pretty difficult to recommend this unless you just really love Laphroaig. I looked around. When this first came out, I think the reviews were somewhat similar to what I was experiencing. Good, but maybe not what everyone was expecting. Was looking at Whiskey Base to try to figure out if they knew if this had coloring or show filtration status, that sort of thing. I think it had like over an 86, which is a generally good score on Whiskey Base. So it sounds like people are enjoying this, but this particular batch of it, at least, did not hit for me. I'll pick one up at some point in the future to try it, or maybe I'll get to try it at a bar from a friend and just kind of see where it's at, if it's improved at all since 2021. But I'm going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think of this bottle. Leave a comment below. Has this gotten better? Have you gotten to taste multiple versions of it? Let me and everyone else know down in the comments. And if you haven't yet, please hit subscribe, hit that like button, and we'll be back again next week for another whiskey review. See you then. Cheers.